Welcome to the Women Changing the World podcast, a podcast on a mission to bring you some of the most amazing women I know who are doing incredible things to generally make the world a better place. From corporate sustainability to straight up magic and everything in between, you'll meet the real life humans who are birthing the new. I'm your host, Liz Best, and I'm here to amplify the stories and voices of women who are changing the world. Hello, I am so excited for today's conversation with Sarah Deane, the CEO and founder of MEvolution. When Sarah and I first met virtually, we connected on so many things. Personal sustainability, burnout, and energy management are just a few. In today's conversation, we sat down and talked about these topics, plus things like neuroscience, boundaries, values, celebrating wins, and how we go from exhausted to thriving. We also discussed leadership, positive energy, and so much more. A bit more background on Sarah. She is a leading expert in human energy and capacity and an innovator working at the intersection of behavioral and cognitive science with artificial intelligence, or AI. Through over 5 years of research and application within enterprises, she discovered that thriving individuals effectively manage their mental, emotional, and physical energy through very specific and learnable behaviors. Her primary focus is using this blueprint to help individuals and organizations overcome blockers to live happier, more productive, successful, and meaningful lives through personal energy management. Sarah received a Master of Engineering in Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence, has led workplace experience initiatives and research serving a global base of over 300,000 employees, and has traveled the world studying human behavior. Her company, MEvolution, is a scalable, science-based personal development system that measures and systematically increases human capacity by teaching people how to manage, direct, and optimize their energy. She is the author of The Wellness Formula, which is based on her extensive research into what is needed to thrive, and has presented at various conferences such as South by Southwest, Gartner, and HR West. Her expertise has garnered features in Fast Company, The Wall Street Journal, The Huffington Post, Thrive Global, Reworked, and CIO Magazine, among others. Additionally, Sarah teaches highly rated courses at Stanford University Continuing Studies, focusing on the power of personal energy management. She coaches executives and provides consultation to help leaders develop strategies for creating positively energized workplace cultures. As you can tell, Sarah is amazing, and I am so excited for you to join in on this conversation on personal energy management and so much more. I am so excited to have Sarah Deane with me today, who is the founder and CEO of MEvolution. Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about all the things today.
Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. We have so much to talk about. Maybe before we dive in, would you mind just briefly introducing yourself to our listeners?
Sure, yes. So you've read I'm Sarah Deane. I'm the founder and CEO of MEvolution. And what we do is we help people, teams, and organizations kind of measure and master human energy management. I live out in the Bay Area, and that's about it, really.
I love it.
Unless you have anything specific you want to know. Like my favorite music.
I mean, I would love to know your favorite music if you want to share.
I listen to all old songs. I'm not even joking. Like I know nothing from the last 5 to 10 years.
I love it. I have a theory that all of our musical taste gets frozen like around late high school into our early 20s, and then we just don't evolve.
No, I've been listening to the same thing. My husband's like, oh my God, this was like from 20 years ago. I'm like, I know, but I love it.
That's amazing. Well, I would love to hear a little bit about what you're up to these days, both personally and professionally. I know we're going to talk all about personal energy management and MEvolution, but we would just love to hear a little bit more about what's currently on your plate.
Yeah, so business-wise, busy growing the business, working with different teams, organizations, kind of expanding out into different markets, which is exciting. I spend a fair amount of my time speaking about energy management, whether that's speaking engagements or teaching at Stanford continuing studies, and then writing also about energy management. But I also like writing on Reworked at the moment. Once a month, I write something to do with employee experience or engagement. So pretty much all things energy management professionally and personally, actually, because I just had my second child not that long ago. And so energy management has come in very handy. So yes, I kind of live and breathe it.
Oh, yeah. Congratulations on having your second child. I can only imagine how
Thank
much,
you.
you're welcome. I can only imagine how much energy management is at the forefront of that experience right now.
Oh, yes. It gets me through a lot.
Well, so I have had the benefit of a preview of the work that you're doing at MEvolution. And I would love to start because I know our listeners are probably curious, like, what are we talking about when we talk about energy management and personal energy management? So maybe let's start with just a definition of that. And then we'd love to talk a little bit more about the specific work that you're doing.
Yeah, totally. So energy management is really all about how you focus, save, spend, direct your energy, whether that's your physical energy, that you exert when you do tasks, whether it's your mental energy, your emotional energy. It's all about how you do that, really. And there's very specific behaviors that enable people to do that well. We've done a lot of research and data modeling in looking at people that really thrive. And when we talk about people that thrive, they're people that feel good, they perform well, they're kind of flourishing in life. And the difference that we found was that they tended to manage their energy really, really well through very specific behaviors. And so that's what energy management is. It's all about being aware of your energetic state and then making sure that you're directing energy to the things that matter.
So cool. And I'm really excited to talk about the behaviors that help us manage it well. So, yeah, let's start with identifying a person or a team's unique behavioral and cognitive formula that helps them get clarity, focus, and performance. What different aspects contribute to what you describe as a positively energized human?
So there's a bunch of behaviors. I mean, obviously, like the blueprint to being positively energized is pretty big, right? There's a lot of different behaviors, but they fell into 8 categories, if you will. So the first 3 really influence how you think. So how clearly do you see situations? We call that internalization. Accurate correlations is how well are you joining the dots between the information you take in and the information that you have stored up here? And then how optimally do you respond? So those 3 areas. Then there was a bunch of things to do with your internal peace and harmony. So achievement, how much do you feel a sense of achievement? Purpose and meaning, how connected are you to something that matters? Boundaries, right? How well do you protect and direct your energy? And then there was 2 that was to do with the way that you interact with the world around you. So interactions with others, that's the quality of the moments that you have with others, which we call relational energy. And then also support. So how well do you access and embrace support? So there was these 8 areas that really influence kind of how you think, feel, and interact with the world around you. And then underneath each of those is a bunch of behaviors that we measure and then help people kind of master. And then we'll bring it all together into what we call a framework for living a positively energized life. So I can share a bit more about that too if you want.
Yeah, I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So it's the same as if you're optimizing fuel for your car. So if you want to optimize your car, you don't want any leaks in the petrol or the gas, right? Same with you. You don't want any leaks in your energy. You want to plug up all the areas that you're draining your energy. You need to fuel up. You can't get very far in a car without gassing up. Same for you, right? You need to fuel up. You want to optimize how you use your energy. So even if you wake up and you're at 40% energy, that 40% has to count. You can still have a very good day, right? If you make it count. Same as in your car. You might have a full tank, I might have a full tank, but I might get more miles than you because of the way that I'm driving, right? So are your behaviors optimizing your energy? And then that relational energy. Just like on the road, you have to be aware of others, how they're driving, how you're driving. Same with your energy, being aware of other people's energy, your energy, and how it's playing together. So those 4 things make up the positively energized framework.
So interesting. I'm curious if you have some specific examples of energy leaks that you observe in folks, because I could see, I know there's like so much we could say about each of these 4, but I'm like, ooh, what are some common leaks?
Yeah, there's a bunch of those too. A lot of them to do with how you're interpreting things, how you're internalizing things, right? So for example, rumination or overthinking. Huge waste of energy, right? Because there's a point in time when you're thinking about something productively and then it turns into just a waste of energy, right? You're not actually moving forward. So that's a big leak for people. People pleasing, that's another big leak because you're not actually directing it meaningfully. You're kind of being drawn towards saying yes to things. Your relationship with control, people really fighting against control, and not embracing what they actually can't control. Or on the flip side, really understanding the full scope of your control and influence. Sometimes we think we have much less than we actually do. That can be hugely draining because you're wasting your energy on all these cycles as opposed to being productive with it. So there's just a few examples. I can go on. That could be the whole podcast, honestly, just energy drain.
I love it. Well, I definitely think we're going to probably come back to more of those. But you alluded to something, and even just your answer on the energy leaks, which I know is something that when we first spoke, I was really struck by the extent to which neuroscience is informing this work when we think about habits like ruminating or trying to control everything. Obviously, those are things that are happening in our brains. And I know that this is something, again, that you've brought science to. It's not just your opinion.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear, which is really refreshing, honestly, because I know there's so much work going on in this space and in this world around how we show up, how we thrive. And I'm all about the more intuitive approach to this as well. And it's also really cool to hear that there is science to back it up. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your own journey with neuroscience and how it's incorporated into this work.
Well, I've had a fascination with the brain since I was small. My dad's a neuroscientist, so I just grew up around it. And I think it's possibly one of the most powerful things ever. You can do a lot when you strengthen your mind and your mental fortitude. It's just incredibly powerful, right? So I've always been very close to it. But we incorporate many things in our toolkits that we give people, because when we started off researching this and the data, it took us all over the place, from neuroscience to psychology to ancient philosophies, mindfulness, it took us all over the place. But at its core, energy management is really built around the concept that energy is actually your human currency. Right? Your brain requires energy to do absolutely everything. Every single transaction has a price tag, and that price tag is in energy. So whether you're listening to me right now or you're fighting the common cold, you're paying for that. And the more energy you have and the more effectively you manage it, you're a more effective human, right? So I always tell people, think of your energy account as the most important account of your life, because that's what you're paying to get through your day and get through it well and pay for all these amazing things. And you know it too, right? When you're tired, do you listen as well? No, you can't pay to listen as well, right? You're tired. And so neuroscience plays a big role in a lot of what we do, because you have to kind of understand your brain and mind and how they work, right? Your conscious and your subconscious, because a lot of our choices are stemming from these experiences that we've had throughout our lives and these rules that we have written down that are kind of like a library in our head, where your brain's popping off there and it's looking there and it's saying, okay, what's my best guess? What do I do next? And understanding that is really key. Because a lot of the stuff that we do, we think, oh, it's just me, but it's not. It's something we've learned, and therefore we can unlearn it, right? So one is the science underpinning it. The second is really making people aware of how their brain and mind works. A lot of people that go through the system find that part really, really interesting, right? It's like, oh, that's why I do that. Well, that's how my mind's working. And then we use various techniques as well. So we can help people kind of retrain their brains and rewrite those books that are no longer serving them. So it kind of shows up all over the place, because that's the underpinning theory of energy management, right? You want to optimize that energy account so you can be more effective.
Totally. And I'm curious, I guess, from a neuroscience perspective, how is it possible to study or evaluate or look at how our brains are managing energy on a day-to-day basis?
Well, there's a physical aspect to it, and we're working on some of those things in the future, right? And what we're looking at right now is really the kind of mental habits and the behaviors that you can learn about how someone's thinking. So it wasn't easy. It's taken us over 5 years, right, to build the algorithm and to build the evaluation and understand all the components. And really, it was a follow the data story, right? Take loads of data and look at the patterns in it. But what we do is there's an assessment that someone takes it and it's reflective. So you'll imagine yourself in some scenarios. And once they've taken it, we actually use over 1,200 indicators, points of analysis, for the relationships in their responses to tell us, hey, this is where your energy is being drained, this is where you can be better, because we're mapping it against that model. And so you kind of learn, you're gathering evidence almost, kind of like when you go for a blood test, right? They take blood and then they look for markers and they say, hey, you look like you're at risk for this. It's kind of the same thing here. When we see some evidence of stuff, we say, yeah, it's pretty likely that this type of stuff will flare up for you and that will drain your energy. We haven't been wrong yet. Hundreds and hundreds of accuracy post-interviews, right? After 5 years, we got there.
That's so interesting. And so I have to ask, I know our listeners really love hearing how people came to be where they are today. And I know you've had such an interesting journey up to this point. So I would really love to hear a little bit more about your journey. And the invitation is to take up space and tell your story. I think it's so interesting to hear the twists and turns that have brought you to this moment.
Definitely twists and turns. Like, I'm sure, definitely not something planned. Had you said this to, Sarah 20 years ago, I'd be like, what are you talking about? Working in energy management, imagining all kinds of things, right? But like I said, I've always been fascinated by the brain, but I started out in AI. So I'd done my master's in AI. That was over 20 years ago. So before it was a current buzzword. And also I was the only woman in that class. And after that, I kind of figured that I didn't really appreciate my skills in coding. I was really good at data and algorithms, but not so great there and didn't really enjoy it. But I loved all the human behavior and psychology stuff. That's what brought me out to Silicon Valley, actually, was to go and work for HP at the time. They had an interesting role in employee experience, and I thought that's great. I ended up in worldwide employee experience there, which was fabulous. I got to travel the world, studying people, behavior, workplace experience. And then over time, I just kind of realized that measurement sucked. We kept measuring things. Whether it's skills, employee experience, customer experience, workplace culture, you name it, there's 100 million measurements out there. And still as leadership, you'd sit around a table and you'd be like, what do we do now? You'd have this gorgeous report, right? And even think about some of the things that you take for your leadership skills. Like you take an assessment, you get a nice report, you read it, you're like, oh yeah, this is great. And then you put it away, right? Or it's hard to act on the actual data, no matter how good the report is. And so what we've done was look at how can we create a measurement system where your report is a roadmap. And so you understand exactly the actions you need to take. And so we developed something for that. And what it does is it tells you the ecosystem, because that's the best way to achieve a goal, is build the ecosystem in which the goal is the most natural byproduct, right? Because then you know where to spend all your resources. And so that was my first company. I actually had another company before this. And that's what we've done. We built these data models for companies, for enterprise. And then someone came to us in 2017 and said, like, people are not feeling great. Like, can you build an ecosystem model for this? That was pre-pandemic, right? Can you build an ecosystem model for this and just see what's going on? And so we said, that's really interesting. Let's do it. The question we had at the time was what's needed to perform and feel your best throughout the day. There's tons of performance models, right? How can you be high performing? And a ton of people end up burnt out. There's tons of happiness models, and you focus on being all happy, and then you're like, well, I want to achieve some form of professional success, right? So let's blend the two, and let's say like what's needed to feel that way throughout your day, because there's success and performance also in your personal life, right? So you want it to be throughout the day. You don't change your brain just because you go from work to home, right? So that was our question, and it was about a year of data collection and data modeling that gave us our first set of attributes, and then it kind of took off from there. We were using it with people. And then 2019, it was like 2 years later, the data clustered up and told us exactly what I said at the beginning, right? That the difference between those that thrive and those that don't is that they manage their mental, emotional, physical energy really, really well. And when we realized that, we were like, oh my gosh, there's a blueprint for human energy. And now we can actually democratize it. Because most of the time, learning to this depth about yourself and then doing this type of work is normally kept for elites in organizations or society because of the cost associated with it, because you have to go talk to someone for ages, or it's like some high touch program, right? That has a high cost. So it's reserved for specific groups of people. But now we could do it with technology, right? That gives us the opportunity to bring it to anyone that wants to increase their capacity. And I think that that's how the world should be. Anyone that wants to live life at full capacity should have access to the tools to do it, because you just never know what happens when someone can access their full capacity, right? And so that was it. Once we realized we had this blueprint, we became MEvolution in 2021, and we haven't looked back since. Long story.
Oh my goodness. I'm so here for it. Well, and honestly, I would even love to hear, I'd love to make it longer because I'd love to hear too, like how things have been evolving for MEvolution since 2021.
Lots of twists and turns there too. So we started out with one version, and then it's been this constant cycle of learning from our customers and improving it. I'll be honest with you, it wasn't until last year we were like, oh, we're there now. Like, we've got it now. The reports work how we want them to. The system works how we want it to, because we had to learn. And what we learned was that the best way to train your brain is similar to going to the gym. You want to be consistent a couple times a week, right? But there's a reality you face as well. Not everyone goes to a gym 3-4 times a week, right? Some people go once a week. Some people just want to do a Zumba class a month. And our system has to mirror that, because you have to meet people where they're at. And so we learned a ton and we implemented it differently so that people can engage with the learning and the application the way that they wanted to. And now we see phenomenal like engagement with it, people learning, still fast results. So it just took us a while to learn, how do you do this with people without them going to talk to someone for 3 months, right? Like how do we actually handhold them through this journey in a way that works and gets us the impact? Because there's no point doing it otherwise, right? And so it's been a journey of twists and turns and learnings, but we're very much a, learn, test, respond kind of company. So
absolutely. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, it's always so interesting to hear. And I know when we're in it, it never feels like it's happening fast enough. But also 2021 to now, I'm sure it felt long at the time. And it's also, that was so recent, and how cool that you've built and iterated and tested and gotten to this place where you feel like you've unlocked it.
Yeah, you look back at the previous versions like, oh my God, what was we thinking? Like, why would we have had the report look like this?
Absolutely. But I also feel like there's so much to be said for, I wish I remember who I read this from. Basically, the idea is like, if your first draft doesn't make you cringe later, then you didn't launch early enough, because everyone who's been successful at anything started with something that was like cringy.
Totally, right? So first, second, third, even fourth, maybe, right?
Absolutely.
But it's one of those things. You have to design it for the people that are going to use it and get the impact, right? And so coming from experienced design world, it's innate to us to test and iterate. So we're excited about the future now that we have something we're like, yes, this works for most people to access it at their capacity level.
That's awesome. I am interrupting this episode of the Women Changing the World podcast really quickly to personally invite you to join us inside Girls Club Collective. Our doors only open 4 times a year, and I don't want you to miss your chance. The Girls Club Collective is an intentionally intimate leadership lab for change agents and the personal and professional development community that you've been looking for. Don't just take my word for it, though. When you're submitting your application on our website, girlsclubcollective.co, please be sure to read one of the countless testimonials from our incredible members and alumni. There are so many benefits to being a part of the collective, which is designed around our signature feminine leadership framework. That means you'll have opportunities every month for connection, embodied strategy, visibility, and amplification. You'll also have countless opportunities to connect live and asynchronously with other amazing leaders on topics like reimagining our ambition. Applications are due on September 20th, and our doors won't open again until December. Don't forget to mention our podcast in the Where Did You Hear About the Cohort section on the application. Now, back to the episode. Well, I know you mentioned burnout, which is something that we initially bonded over, or as you refer to it, the human energy crisis. Or I heard even as we were first having on this call, I don't know if you said like the age of gloom, or...
Yes, the great gloom is, I can't remember who referred to it first like that. Maybe it was Gartner or Gallup, like one of them referred to it as, I'll have to look back and see, but one of them referred to it, the great gloom.
Totally, like something is happening. We are not okay.
We are not okay. That should be the phrase of like, we are not okay. That's the phrase of the year. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd love to hear your thoughts on like, why aren't we okay? I mean, certainly I have some ideas. Like, why do you think this is such an epidemic, especially right now?
Oh, I love these big, big questions that we could talk on for the whole podcast, right? There's a few reasons that I think of, but I'll give you 3 that I think are really important, right? One is people just never stop. They just keep going and going and going. You have to realize everything you're doing, you're spending energy. So if you just keep going and going and going, you're just getting more and more into energy deficit, right? And then you can't pay for the things. You just can't, right? You don't have the energy in your energy bank. You're depleted. You don't have the energy for conversations, for thinking, for motivation, for hope, right? You don't have any energy for any of these positive things. And my theory in the pandemic is that, hey, look, it started and there was a few weeks and it was kind of enjoyable because everyone was not enjoyable, but like, you were at home, you're like, ooh, flexibility. This is, you're like, I can manage this for a few weeks. And then it got longer and people went into their overdraft, their energy bank overdraft, right? And then as it went on, you got the debt collectors coming. And then we kind of shifted out of it because we could go to restaurants and get on planes, but there was no real time to recover from all this massive trauma. And so we just carried on from that super depleted state. And people are just entering every single year more and more tired. And they keep going, right? I remember back when, where you'd all break for Christmas holiday and you'd all come back full of energy. You had this like break and Christmas and New Year, and you'd come back, it's a new year. Can you tell me the last time you remember a year where people came back from Christmas holidays? Like, yes, I'm raring to go. No, right? Like it's every year people are more tired and more tired because they keep eating into their energy bank. The second thing is there's a ton of perceived stress, right? So as humans, we are incredibly able to deal with tons of actual stress. We actually are. We're pretty resilient as far as that goes. Perceived stress, all those what ifs, the past and future worrying, like adding to the picture is killing people because there's no end to perceived stress. You just keep creating images and then worrying about them. There's no end to that. When you look at the actual situation, there's an end to that. There's facts of the situation, right? And you can handle it. And then third, sorry, you probably didn't want all three, but I'll give you three.
I'm here for all three.
We've recognized this like progressive state of burnout, right? Oh, burnout's bad, burnout's high, burnout's high. Oh, burnout's even higher. Oh my gosh, it's still high, right? Like we've been here for years now. Many organizations don't actually fix burnout like in the long term. They'll use solutions, that have a momentary peak, and then 3 weeks later, people are burnt out again. And many things contribute to that. Some of them are just unaware, like how do we actually solve this in a sustainable way? Some just don't look deep enough, right? What's the true sources? They'll be like, hey, give them a few days off, give them an app for this. And that's all good. Like we need those shorter-term capacity builders too. But we do need to go deeper and look at the sources of the burnout and how we address those. And that's really key. And not enough organizations can do that at scale and do it really, really well.
Definitely. Well, and to pick up on that last piece, have you found in your work that are there common contributors to burnout that tend to hold true across different individuals and organizations? Or do we each have more of a unique burnout fingerprint that's what causes and creates our own burnout, whether through like a combination of big external factors and internal factors? Or I don't know, I'm interested to hear more about what you've observed is the cause often for this ongoing burnout.
Yeah, you kind of hit it on the head. It's both, right? There's external factors and internal factors, which are a bit more personalized and custom to each person. Externally, you might see it materialize as something like in an organization. Oh, we're always reactive. We have too much on our plate. That's stuff, right? That contributes to burnout. Or some organizational behaviors, like my boss emails me on the weekend and expects me to reply, right? Like all these pressures and things like that. But then internally, you've got behaviors and mental habits that are going to cause you to be more fatigued because they're draining your energy. And so that's what you're combating. And that's why I always say you've got to look one layer lower. So if you're like, I'm burnt out, I've just got too much to do. Okay, why do you have so much to do? Well, I have all this at work and I have all this at home. Okay, but why? There's normally, if you keep going, there's normally going to be something. I feel the need to do everything. I don't accept help. I don't like being vulnerable. I'm a people pleaser. I worry that if I don't do it, it won't be done right. At the bottom there is something that is causing the symptoms almost that you're seeing, right? And you want to understand both because there'll be external contributors to that. But even those come back down to some form of human behavior. If your organization is a place where it's always reactive, guess what? There's normally humans behind that reactivity, right? So it normally comes back down to looking deep enough. And I think that's the problem, right? Organizations don't go deep enough. So they solve kind of temporarily Band-Aid the top, and at some point the Band-Aid just flies off.
Totally, because they're not addressing the cultural factors that are contributing to the situation or the individual factors.
Exactly. And they can be different for people, right? Different people have different combinations.
Definitely. Well, and I feel like at least, I work primarily with women in the impact space. And I know that for the women, I know I love working with women. And for the women in my world, burnout is very much a thing. And energy management is especially important for those of us who care deeply about building a better future and who are often holding so much in our personal and professional lives. And I know that you're really passionate about energy management, specifically for women. What have you found to be especially impactful in helping women in particular manage our energy?
So one, I think, is the awareness of the linkage to their energy. Like they'll resonate, like they'll be like, oh yeah, I do that. But really understanding what that's doing in the grand scheme of your human effectiveness and your human sustainability and your capacity, I think is really impactful. When they see it in the data in the report, then they have those moments of like, well, I always kind of felt like I was doing this, but they didn't realize how much it's impacting their overall capacity as a human.
Can you give us a specific example of something that someone's like, oh, I didn't realize I was doing this, but I now totally see how much I am doing this and how it's affecting me?
Yeah, of course, there's so many of them, honestly, like whether it's celebrating wins, rumination, setting boundaries, inner voice, like all of those things. Or even we have like strategic communications. Oh, I didn't realize I was jumping in so quickly because my mind's just so busy and I'm thinking about the next thing that I'm like cutting the other person off, or I'm not hearing what the other person is saying because I'm just so quick to move the conversation on. Like there's all these types of things to become aware of, right, that have energy draining moments or cause a problem with relational energy, right? And so they'll normally get it. And a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, I can see where I do that. But when they see what it does to their energy, because we measure on an energy scale, right? And they say like, oh, here I am on my energy. Well, these are the reasons why. And another big one people realize is they'll work out, they'll eat really well, and they're still fatigued. They didn't realize how much of their energy was being drained in other things, like not living their personal core values consistently, right? Overthinking, like things like this, where they're like, oh, because, you know, you're being healthy, right? So you're like, oh, I should be wonderful and alive. And like,
yeah, you get a good night's sleep. Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, that's why I feel this way. Because there's a whole next element to it. Your physical health is one aspect, an important aspect, no doubt. But there's a lot of reasons why you might also be feeling fatigued, even though you're doing all those things. So you really do have to think about your mental and emotional energy as well, right? It could be that little grudge that you're still holding from 5 years ago, right? It's still there, niggling away, eating up your capacity, right? Someone you haven't forgiven. There's so many different aspects to energy management. So just understanding your formula and being like, oh my God. And when you start working on it, you start getting that energy back. Now you can spend it anywhere you want.
Yes, I'm so here for it. And I feel like in that spirit, some of your work helps women do things like set better boundaries, stop ruminating, or develop a new relationship with their imposter syndrome. Like, how does that work? How can we do some of these things to give ourselves more energy?
So like anything, there's two prongs attack, right? There's always something like tactical that you can do to kind of band-aid the moment while you're working on it. The reality is to really change these things and make it your new automatic way of being, it's going to take a bit of effort, just like going to a gym, right? If only I could imagine myself skinnier and just lose the weight, right? Like it doesn't work that way, right? You have to do something. And so we focus on rewriting the books. And that's a 3-part process that we guide the women through. So the first part is called exploration. This is like, let's help them understand which books these behaviors are coming from. What rules is your brain using and where do they come from? What's your stories and why are you doing this? Then it's a phase of awareness. Like become really alert to your triggers, become really alert when something is happening, because that's how you're going to train your brain to know, hey, I'm in this phase. I want to do something different. I don't want to fall back to the same things I've been doing. And then there's the practice of the new process, like actually weaving it into their day. And we have a bunch of tools in the systems, from guided chatbots to guided videos, that they could just pull up during the day and use as they're working on the new technique. So if they're like, oh, I'm ruminating, they've caught it, they're aware, they can go and practice the new process, right? Ask themselves the right questions so that they don't end up ruminating. And then it becomes like a gym. I always tell people, I'm sorry, it sounds magical and it is magical, but the actual brain training is not that sexy at all. It's like the gym, just reps and reps and reps, right? Until it becomes more automatic. But you'll be surprised how fast it happens. Like women say to me like, oh my gosh, I've been doing this for 20 years. And in 8 to 12 weeks, they're not even doing it hardly as much anymore, right? Because you're training. Every time you do it and your brain gets a good response, it goes, oh, this is great, let's do it again. And so you just learn the new process, right? And it becomes automatic.
Totally. Well, it's like, how do we stop our brains from operating like just in the grooves that they're used to? Like, how do we identify the moment when we're about to go down the familiar path because it's familiar and say like, hey, actually, I forgot I'm taking the scenic route and I'm going to go this way this time. And then you're rewarded with the views and all the positive reinforcement that comes from doing the new behavior, so that at some point you don't have to consciously decide to take the new path.
Exactly right. It's like learning a language, right? When you start learning a new language, you translate in your brain, you tell yourself in English and you figure out the word in the new language. And then before you know it, you're thinking in the new language, right? It's the same thing here. And so we have a way of kind of guiding them through that Like you can start by just becoming aware. Like normally when you go into a state of something, you're going to feel some message, some emotion, some bodily message. You feel your emotions in different places. You can come more in tune with that, right? Like, oh, when I start feeling guilty, this is how I experience that. And you start building up that kind of catalog of context so that you know, oh, I've got that feeling again, therefore this is happening. Let me go ahead and do something else, right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm curious. I know something that we're both passionate about is helping more women decrease stress and experience more of what you refer to as work-life harmony, which I'm so here for. What's your theory on how we can help other people decrease stress and feel more of that balance that can often seem so elusive?
Yeah, there's things you can do that will make you feel good in the moment, right? Where it creates space in your life for some pause and some quiet. And I give you a whole list of tactics. But the reality is, if you want to live life relatively stress-free and like feel like you're living all the demands, you have to understand your underlying reasons for being in that state. You have to. For example, you may be overcommitted and have too much on your plate, but that could stem from any number of things. A need for external validation, your pleasing, your lack of setting boundaries. Like you have to understand the behaviors that you're doing, because once you understand those, that's when you're actually going to change the things that make it sustainable, like personal sustainability. I know me and you bonded over that as well, right? Which is my favorite phrase ever, because we do need personal sustainability. So you have to think of it in two ways, right? What are the skills I need to build, but what blockers do I need to remove? Because there's also things that are going to block you from being able to do these things. There's things that are blocking you from stress management. So you'll say, I want to build stress management skills. That's great. But what are the things blocking you from actually being able to manage your stress well? And those are normally going to be mental habits, right? Things that you've been doing. Because it's not a switch. I wish it was, right? I wish we could be like, hey, I want to set boundaries. Here's a switch. It's like, it doesn't work that way. You have to be willing to be vulnerable and go that little bit deeper and kind of accept those things. And then you can change it.
Absolutely. And so much I feel like of what I found in my own healing journey is that so often the reason why we do the things that we do that are not necessarily serving us goes back to our childhood. Almost always something that happened or some rule that we subconsciously wrote into our operating manual from when we were so young. And totally unbeknownst to us, it's been running the show for however many years.
And being validated, right? Being validated as you go through life. And then what I tell you, the book just gets stronger. It comes to the front of the library, right? That's what happens. And your brain just writes stuff down. And it's trying to do a good thing. It's trying to conserve its energy, right? It's just writing things out. Oh, I can use that information again. But it doesn't really have context when it writes this stuff down. And so you end up using these things again. And they don't really help you. And there comes a time when you say those stories aren't serving me anymore. I need to rewrite them. But guess what? You actually have to put the effort into rewriting them, right? So it's doable. And it's actually pretty simple in terms of process, but it does require effort and intention.
Definitely. I love just knowing what's possible on the other side. And I would love to hear some of the outcomes or shifts that you've seen through the work that you're doing at MEvolution that you've been most inspired by.
Oh, so many, honestly, so many. I remember still one of my favorite pieces of feedback was someone emailed us. Their organization had given it to them and they emailed and they said they had the best marriage of 27 years now that they could manage their energy. I remember thinking that is my favorite piece of feedback ever, I think, right? Because the problem is it's nothing to do with your role. It's to do with you as your human self, right? So the thing that inspires me the most is just how much is impacted by focusing on energy, because it is the baseline currency for all of these other things, whether it's performance, engagement, you name it, right? So in just 12 weeks, we see results like 2/3 experience less anxious thoughts, half are less burnt out, half get more done, 65% describe it as life-changing, and 50% of people have other people in their lives tell them something's different about them, that they're happier or they're calmer. For me, that's really, really inspiring because it's sustained change. When we've done our tests and checked in with people 6 months, a year, 2 years later, the changes are sustained, right? Because you're actually changing the way that they're responding and showing up. And that really inspires me because it's fundamental for the person to live a great life, but those around them also see it and feel it. And that's the beauty of energy management. When you energize a person, you end up lifting up everyone that comes into contact with them, because that's the wonderful ripple effect of energy. If you have a positive energizer near you, you know it. You feel positive, you feel happy, you kind of suck their energy a little bit, right? Like, so it's beautiful. And that kind of inspires me because it means we don't have to run around and energize every single person. We just have to energize enough people to energize the rest of the communities, right?
Yeah, it makes me think of the sun, right? It's like when you're glowing at full power, like that affects everyone around you.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's exactly like that. And you know them. You know the positive energizers around you. You want to be around them all the time. You're like, oh gosh, can I have a little one of you in my pocket, right? And you know the flip side, the energy, I call them energy vampires, right? The people that like suck your energy dry. You just need to see their name and you're like, oh my goodness. So there's both that exist, right? But the more positive energizers we have in the world, the better it's going to be.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't even know if I answered your question, to be honest. I just went off on one because that's why I'm very passionate about creating positive energizers.
I'm here for it. I'm so here for it. I feel like you answered the question. I love giving people who are listening like really tangible takeaways from these conversations. And so if you could offer anyone who is here and they're like, I really want to bring more positive energy into my life, I want to be an energizer, what's like, again, one or a few things that you would suggest that they could try to refuel?
I love you know me so well, one or a few, because Sarah always has a few things to say, right? So I'll give you three. There's so many I could tell you, but I'll give you three. One, I'll link to what I just said, right? So be aware of those drainers, those vampires, people, places, or tasks. Like, what do you do that really just drains your energy? And you'll know, because just keep a log for like a week. After you do various things, how do you feel? Once you understand that, how can you best manage that, right? Some people you have to be around or tasks you have to do, but they deplete you. So do you energize yourself before and after? Do you kind of manage the interaction, limit interactions? Like, don't do multiple de-energizing tasks all back to back. Like, just understand what's actually draining you from a people, place, task perspective. Second, celebrate yourself. Hardly anyone does it enough. Those small wins, it's so important. And I'm not just saying this because it's like, we don't need fanfare and grapes, right? It's just take pause to celebrate the small wins. It's incredibly powerful for your brain. By pausing, reflecting on that good and giving your brain a moment to understand it was good, your brain goes, that's wonderful, let's do it again, right? And it trains it on the decision-making process and it trains it that was important. And so you're kind of missing those opportunities when you just bumble through life onto the next thing. And I'm not talking about big things, right? I'm talking about those daily wins, right? For me, I'm like, oh, I sat down and had a coffee for 10 minutes. Wonderful. Let me celebrate that, right? Like, who doesn't want to celebrate their 10 minutes of peace? So that's really important. And third, focus on your personal core values. So incredibly important. Those 3 to 5 words that really describe who you want to be and how you want to show up in this world. It's so important for energy management because anytime you're anything but that, it's drained significant amounts of energy. Like anyone that has to be someone they're not for a period of time during the day will find themselves much more tired because it's like going to war with yourself. And it's so depleting. So that's just, I can go on though, because basically I can tell you the whole energy management model, right? But like, those are 3 I would say, at least start there, right?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm so here for those starting points. And it also, I'm just smiling too, because radical celebration is one of our values inside Girls Club Collective, because I'm such a big believer that there's so much power, not only celebrating all the small wins, but also being witnessed in our celebration and celebrating in community. I think there's so many reasons that in society we've been conditioned not to take up space or brag or own our accomplishments. And it really does so much for us, I think, for our self-trust, our self-confidence, to be able to claim where we are winning and where we are making progress, and not only claim it, but also be seen in the ways that we're making progress toward being the person we want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a fact, right? You achieved something, so like, why not? So I tell people, if you struggle with it, just start thinking of it as reality facts, right? I done this.
Reality facts. I love it.
Like, it's a reality fact, right? It happened. You done it. So it's okay to say it. It's okay to feel it. It happened.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I also feel like I'd be remiss for anyone listening who's thinking about values. We had an episode on choosing your values this summer with Drew Taylor Cohen. So if you're listening and you want some values fodder, definitely check that out.
Awesome.
I love it. Well, the thing that I have to ask you about, because this is the theme of the podcast in this moment, is leadership, which is something we're talking about a lot this year. What does leadership mean to you right now, Sarah?
Love it. We just carry on these big questions that we could talk for a whole hour on. And as usual, it means a few things to Sarah. So first and foremost, I'm never a one answer thing, right? Taking accountability and being aware is really big, right? So really asking, what can I do in my sphere of control and influence to inspire people, grow them, value them, drive forward some collective good where we're making people's lives that little bit better and leaving the world that little bit better, right? Something beyond ourselves. It means role modeling the behaviors and the mindsets that enable people to be healthy and happy. Empowering people is really important as humans. So if you're a leader, I think your job is not just to empower them in their role and make them the best that they are at their role, but to make them be the best human they can be, because that's when you get all the wonderful things. Because if you have the best human, guess what? That best human is coming to work too. And that best human is really happy in life. And that best human is more connected to what you're doing. So you achieve success together. Obviously, being a leader means being positively energized for me, right? So being aware of how I show up and the energy I bring to things, because research does actually show that positively energized leaders produce substantially higher levels of engagement, lower turnover, better feelings of well-being. And actually in these organizations that have them, they can have outcomes that exceed industry averages for productivity and performance by a factor of 4 or more. So there's a real reason to create positive energizers in your organizations, right? There's a real reason to do it because it's that relational energy. It makes such a difference.
Yes, I love so much about that definition. I so appreciate it. And that's wild for a 4x return on being a positively energized leader is huge.
It's massive, right? Sadly, we don't have that many of them.
But more and more every day, right? More and more every day.
More and more every day, right? We're going to keep going until we positively energize the world.
I'm here for it. Sign me up. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. I mean, I could talk to you for hours. I feel like so many of these topics, we just barely scratched the surface and there's so much more to discuss. And I want to be respectful of your time and our listeners' time. So last thing I'd love to ask for people listening who are like, oh my goodness, I need more Sarah. I need more MEvolution. Where is the best place for people to find you, follow you, and keep up with you?
Yeah, so we have an Instagram that does like some tips and some challenges like twice a week, and it's Join the MEvolution. So you can follow there. You can follow me directly on LinkedIn, Sarah Deane. On LinkedIn, follow me and you'll get posts and challenges there as well. And if you're interested in it, you can also message me directly on LinkedIn as well.
Amazing.
Oh, and the website, sorry. And the website, check out the website.
I feel like you also mentioned an on-demand course. So is that on the website too?
Yes, that is on the website. There's an on-demand course that gives you an introduction to energy management. You can learn all about it and then learn some key skills and have access to some tools to practice it, like some chatbots and some different worksheets and stuff in a very nifty, affordable package. So
awesome. Oh, I love it. Well, we'll be sure to include links to all the things in the show notes for anyone listening. Thank you so much, Sarah. This has been so much fun. And I am feeling positively energized from our conversation and so appreciate you sharing more about you and your journey and your leadership philosophy with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very energized too.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Women Changing the World podcast. Please rate and review the podcast wherever you're currently listening to it, and don't forget to subscribe for future episodes. You can find me on Instagram at liz.best, that's lis.best, and you can find Girls Club Collective at girls_club_collective. You can also find us on LinkedIn by searching for Liz Best, that's my name, LISBEST, and Girls Club Collective. Join our mail list by visiting the Girls Club Collective homepage and scrolling down to the bottom. You'll be in the loop on upcoming events, retreats, and opportunities to make magic with us, and you'll also receive a monthly love note from my heart to your inbox. I am so excited to keep in touch.